Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the latest of our Empower Global Insights. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to have a very old friend of ours, Rick Lacaille, who's the Global Head of ESG for State Street. And he's going to be talking about one of the very thorniest issues today in investment management, the elephant in the room, how to spot sustainable investment, greenwashing, and how to avoid it. Rick, lovely to see you again. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Good to see you too.
Great. Okay, let's crack on. So, as one of the industry's most respected and celebrated CIOs, you've now taken on the role of head of ESG for one of the world's largest financial institutions at a time of huge urgency for ESG. Why did you do it? What's the background?
Well, I mean, ESG has been an increasing part of the asset management business as I was global CIO, so I knew how important it was. State Street is an enormous financial institution with enormous impact potential, and I wanted to maximize the impact that State Street could have and be part of that impact in an area that I think is very important, ESG.
Thank you. And with that urgency that you were talking about, there's also huge scrutiny and skepticism about sustainability and investment and the potential for greenwashing, the elephant in the room and all of those accusations. How do you think companies prove that they are not greenwashing?
Well, it's not easy. I think you have to be absolutely clear about what your investment process is and what the outcome could be for investors. But we know in investment, it's extremely hard to have guaranteed outcome. We know there are no guaranteed outcomes. What we can do is tell people about our investment process and provide evidence of that process, sometimes through data that relates to the holdings we have. But it's not always as clear cut as that. And I think because investment processes are often eclectic, they're qualitative, they can't be pinned down in a mechanical way. And so it is difficult when you're on the outside of a fund to really understand what's going through the thought process of a manager. And it may be when you look at the evidence, you see things that you don't like from an ESG perspective. And that could or could not be evidence of greenwashing. This is the frustrating thing. And that's what leads us to, regulation, the taxonomy and everything else.
Yeah, sure. So kind of if companies say that they utilize an ESG process, how would you advise an investor about how they assess what is actually going on under the bonnet of that company's ESG process?
Well, in an extreme case, you can clearly look at the portfolio itself and say, does that really reflect what the manager claims they're focusing on? Environmental issues or water, particularly at the high impact end. At the very high impact end, maybe it's very easy to see, but most assets aren't at the high impact end. Most funds are integrating ESG authentically. And when you talk to analysts and fund managers, they understand the potential for ESG, but it may not be as reflected in the output as possible. So what do investors do? They do have to get very close to the process to the extent they can, understand what the fund company, what the resources are, what they're doing, and ask them for evidence, not just anecdotal evidence, but harder data. But I have to say, it's very hard, whether it's in the retail area or the institutional area.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think then are the main issues or the main problems that investors face when they're looking at that data? Can you quantify those?
Well, some of the problems are going to be eliminated. It's important to think about the future here. There will be better disclosure by companies themselves about what's going on. So their carbon footprint, their usage of water in Europe in particular. And that's really going to help because you can't ask investors to prove what's in the portfolio from an ESG perspective if further upstream they can't actually get their hands on the data. So the more standardization that we have, the easier it's going to be for investors to demonstrate the way in which they're embedding those in their process. So I think it is compliant explain. I think intermediaries are also very important because they can get much closer to the investment process than an end investor can and really get a much more detailed assessment. but it's a skill-based area. They will need to employ more people who understand this issue inside out. I think regulation is not the answer to everything, but I think the disclosure by companies of the attributes is really going to help investors do a better job.
That's not mandated at the moment, though, is it?
It's being mandated little by little. And I think in Europe, obviously, Europe's the most well advanced, where I think it's been a focus for a number of years. I think different countries around the world take different approaches, but we're moving slowly in that direction. I think a lot of it will be voluntary through things like the International Sustainability Standards Board, which is a really fantastic innovation that will allow us to see much more clearly what's happening.
Right. And do you think they're going to be that the kind of global standardization is going to be based around them rather than the EU?
I think they will be an eventual winning voluntary standard because they're, the genesis of the ISSB is the IFRS, very close to the issuers and the accounting standard setters, and the SASB and BRF, the GRI. So those who are much closer to the sustainability world. So in a way, it's a match made in heaven. I think it will be voluntary, not mandatory, but I think it will get very strong support from investors.
Great. And finally, so how are you at State Street going above and beyond to illustrate the veracity of your ESG commitment in different ways?
Well, we report every year. Firstly, what's important to us as a corporation, we've defined what is material for State Street by asking a variety of stakeholders what they think is important. And then we report on that both to the board and to the outside world. And we have an assurance mechanism that looks at what we're doing in there to ensure that that the data is as robust as we can possibly make it. But definitions are changing. So I think that's the thing we need to bear in mind, the definition of what it means to be good in the social, environmental context, what constitutes an ESG fund under the different regulations is a movable feast. So we've got to be prepared to be a little bit dynamic in the way that we report as well.
Great. Well, that sounds like you're really on top of it, Rick. So thank you so much for your time and for this fantastic leaders' insight. So everybody, thank you for watching and watch this space, because I think State Street are really one of the leaders in addressing greenwashing. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.